Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you build and sustain a better creative business. Except, in all fairness, the last few weeks, I've been digging deep with people about their work and reading their books very carefully and trying to have a very detailed conversation about the worlds that they build and what goes into every piece of the work. And this episode is no exception. I have my new friend, Christie Stratus, on the show. She wrote a phenomenal book called Anatomy of a Darkened Heart. The second book in the series is out. She's working on the third, but I read Anatomy of a Darkened Heart and I friggin' loved it. And so I am so excited to have her on the show to talk in depth about that process. If you want to learn how to write your own amazing novel, I have a great course at thecompletecreative.com/novel, which will tell you all about how to write and create an amazing novel. And it's free. That's thecompletecreative.com/novel. And now I'm going to drop you into our interview already in progress. Abigail's parents just really screwed her up, didn't they?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. They have so many of their own problems, which I really wanted to make sure came out really strongly, that it was not just, we have a child that has issues or, problematic child or something. This is, parents with massive problems of their own. Individual problems and relationship problems that then reflect on the child, and turn her life into such a hell, So yes, she has major problems.
It was such interesting. The book was so interestingly constructed because, like, you have these pieces that are in Abigail's life and in the main characters' lives, and then they just vanish. And when you're watching when you're reading a book, you often expect these people to return. And then they never do. Was that intentionally, narratively integral to the plot, or did it just feel that way to me once I finished it?
That's a great question. I really wanted her life to feel extremely claustrophobic, and I wanted people to disappear, just completely disappear, as if she doesn't even see them in town anymore. So yeah, there are like some small characters and, characters that have a big impact on her life even, that disappear and just fall off the map. And the idea is that her world closes in more and more and more in the book. Especially in the, second part and, the end and everything. It's really important that it feel like the walls are closing in. So I did have them disappear like totally on purpose, and her not like going anywhere or anybody seeing these people again, so that it would feel like everybody's sort of trapped. Like this house is just this very dark, claustrophobic place. And so I'm glad you felt that way, actually, because it is important. And I'm glad you noticed it. You're the first person to ask me about that, actually.
Yay, that's my goal. My goal is to be like, I'm not asking any of these normal questions, or maybe I will like 20 minutes in, but like I want to ask like the real, because like I read the books. Like I actually very judicious about like whether someone comes on the show, like I read their book. I read at least one book. Often I have friends on who have read multiple of their books, but like I at least want to read a book of theirs, because at least one book kind of, you can deconstruct somewhat of what their themes are as a writer. If you can read two or three, even better. But like I'm very conscious about, how people construct their books, because I think it says, a lot about them, the things that they focus on, and the things that are important to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And it's really, really nice that you read my book. I actually didn't even realize you would have time to. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I think it's the least that I can do for people that are on my show. Plus, it just makes the interview so much richer and more. For instance, I had, I believe, our mutual friend, Jennifer Gordon, on the show a couple of weeks ago. And actually, when I was reading your book, it was quite reminiscent, not in like tone necessarily, but in the way that you guys both are very meticulously attuned to the details of mundanity and blowing them up and making them feel important, because they are important. I mean, like, most of life is mundane, boring stuff, and you both have this amazing way of taking like years of people's lives or chapters of people's lives, and instead of focusing on like the big explosion, you focus on like this one Wednesday when they whittled, and like making it making it feel like really, really important. And is sort of like finding the beauty in these like little moments sort of like a theme that is important to you?
Yeah, actually, I'm reading her book right now, so it's great that you brought that up. And I agree, I like her style quite a lot. Yeah, it is important to me because I feel that when I read a book and I read one of those little mundane points, like the tiny things we feel in life, or the tiny moments that we go through that we either don't think too much about or we think nobody else thinks about them, sometimes are really important. And when I read them in another book, I find myself really attached to those moments and thinking that sometimes they're the best things in the book. So I do like to include those. And it is important for me to show you what a character's like ideal points of life might be. For example, you know, we're going to hear a lot, or at least as much detail as I tend to give about the things that Abigail appreciates about the outdoors, you know, and that is important because, as I said before, one of the themes in Anatomy of a Darkened Heart is claustrophobia. So we have the outdoors, you know, which is like this wide open world, which is still a bit claustrophobic because it's really mostly only her property in a public garden. But, you know, like those moments of her being like reading under a weeping willow and those moments of her just appreciating a garden are kind of the only freedoms she really has. And so to explore those in a little bit more depth and show that she can be happy at times, and as long as she's away from her parents, who are very abusive, is just as important as showing the scenes that are really intense. Otherwise, those intense scenes kind of, they wouldn't be as intense because they would have like nothing to lie against in a way.
Absolutely. I mean, I actually felt that Abigail was like a quite happy person throughout much of the book. Like she was maybe not happy, but she was hopeful. In fact, it felt like she was hopeful even at the end. Like even like as you reach the end, you know, a lot of the manic parts of her were about this hope that she can not break things anymore or that she could mend these things. It didn't feel like she was like manic for the sake of mania or, you know, even though she was quite a broken human with every right to be broken based on her childhood, it didn't feel like she was like acting out of that brokenness to like smash other things. It felt like she was acting out, trying to hold the things together to make sure more things didn't break.
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. And so one of the questions I like to think about in that book is, you know, is somebody born just like, you know, she feels like she's a good person. She comes across as a decent human being, as you said. She has a lot of hope. She's not a bad person. But the way she's raised, you know, she really has no proof outside of her own thoughts that she's a good person. Her parents treat her as if she's something terrible and something in the way and something problematic, and she's really not. And so that's one of the questions I sort of was asking myself as I wrote the book. Like, what do you become if internally you know you're one person, but externally everything else tells you you're something utterly different and way against your grain? So I wanted to explore that throughout the whole book. And as you said, even toward the end, you know, it's not that she's trying to hurt anybody. She doesn't want people to suffer, but she is desperate for people to stay with her. She's used to loss and pain, and she just wants all of that to sort of resolve, and she wants everyone to stay put and everyone to just be there, and everything to just go on okay, you know. And I mean, the means she takes to make that happen are not good, obviously. And that's where, you know, like her upbringing and the parts of her that are broken really hurt because there's no way she can open up, you know, to her siblings and say, here's what's going on with me. And anyways, the Victorian era, like we don't do this whole opening up thing at all. So it's all very closed. And because of this lack of communication and her being really the only abused one in the family, it's so hard for her to be able to do something like open up or, say what a problem is or even say what she wants in life. And so she really has to take some manipulative means to do it. But at the same time, we know that she's not actually a bad person. So I love exploring gray areas, whether it's moral gray areas or internal and gray areas. I have that in all of my books. And, I have 2 books out, but the third one, is coming. So, that is an important thing, the gray areas where we're not really sure how to think of it or how to handle it.
Well, one of the things that I thought was so lovely at the beginning of the book, and it really speaks to all of the things you were talking about, was the birdcage. And just it speaks to the Victorianness of it. It speaks to like the era, the repression. It speaks to these small moments. It speaks to like this gray area where you, so I would love for you to sort of like speak about that specific scene and how you constructed it and like how it like was, like it felt to me like a pivotal moment to understand where we were going in the book, but I'm not sure that it was intended that way. So could you just talk a little bit about the scene, maybe talk a little bit about the book and who you are as well, since we just sort of jumped right into it and we're like 11 minutes into this thing?
Absolutely. That's a good point. We were having such a great conversation. We just continued. I am Christie Stratus. I'm the author of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart and Brotherhood of Secrets. They are both books in the Dark Victoriana collection, which are both Victorian suspense. So if you like psychological, if you like suspense, and if you like dark fiction, you will like these books. The intention behind them is also to write fast-paced Victorian fiction. So nothing that's dragging out the way we sometimes think of older era books, maybe. And so I'm writing my third book now, which will focus on one of the characters from Brotherhood of Secrets. So you were talking about the birdcage. And that's okay. When I make a metaphor, I find it extremely important to think it all the way through. And as I'm sure you noticed in the story, there's a lot of historical accuracy, a lot of historical detail that does take quite a lot of research. If I'm going to mention a type of wood, that's even used like to try and describe a room or something, it's got to be accurate to the time period. And it can't just be accurate to the time period. It has to be accurate to the kind of family we're dealing with. So this would be more middle class. So we can't have something that wealthy people would have. So of course, like I'm saying, the details are extremely important to me and I researched them really, really well. So when I was I wanted to come up with a way that 2 characters, could show opposition to each other. And we already know that they're in conflict because this happens early on in the book, so I'm sure it's not too much of a spoiler. If you don't want it spoiled, then just read the book first. It's not too long. But in Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, we have 2 characters, one who is married to, part of the main family, which is the Whitestone family. That's who we're dealing with. We have Elizabeth Whitestone, and then, so that's the main family. And then we have this outside family. And the name of the woman is Victoria, who we're talking about. So Elizabeth Whitestone finds out through probably one of the most embarrassing means possible in the Victorian era that Victoria is sleeping with her husband and carrying on this affair, which of course is a much bigger deal in that time period, even when everything is all etiquette. And, having high morals were very, very, very important. Cheating is a big deal anytime, obviously, but back then it's even worse. So we have these 2 characters, and Elizabeth Whitestone, who is the mother, Abigail's mother, she really wants to get back at Victoria. She really wants to hurt her for her own pain. And she comes up with the gift of a birdcage. And I really wanted to think through this kind of metaphor. I wanted it to be a really good symbol. Whenever I do metaphors, they have to be very well thought through. Otherwise, I don't think they're worth doing. So the idea is Victoria is actually stuck in her own marriage, she doesn't have children, and this really, really hurts her and upsets her. She would love children, and her husband is really cold about it. He really doesn't care, and he's pretty cold in general. And that all of that really hurts her. She probably would have loved to adopted anything like that, but the husband is just sort of like, he's not having any of that. And she's pretty well controlled by him, as many women were by their husbands in that time period. We see that with Elizabeth as well. And Elizabeth also struggles with the control of her husband, who won't even let her do the sort of like bookkeeping at home, which could be a feminine task. It's within the feminine sphere of home back then in the Victorian era. And she's not even allowed to do that. So we have two people who really actually could have been good friends. They're both suppressed in ways that hurt them. Their husbands hurt them a lot. They really could have been best friends, but they end up opposed because of this relationship that Victoria has with the husband. And so Elizabeth is very determined to show her that, she's better than Victoria, and, that she has more freedom than Victoria. And look, I have a child. Look how happy I am, and all this kind of stuff. It's just to hurt her. And I wanted her to give Victoria a gift. And that gift was a bird cage. And she outright says, now you'll have something in common with your pet. So she'll have a bird and a bird cage. And of course, the insinuation is you're trapped, and everyone knows it. And so there, like I want you to hurt. And I'm telling you that the town and everyone in it recognizes, that you are trapped in your marriage. And even if they know that you're cheating with my husband, you're trapped in not even being with him. You have nothing. You know what I mean? So she's really trying to hurt her in this very symbolic way. And of course, we see afterwards, after Elizabeth gives her that present, there really isn't any relief. Elizabeth hurting someone doesn't actually make her feel any better. In fact, she's left with a lot of emptiness. And of course, Victoria goes home with this birdcage, just totally stunned and in a lot of pain, that, other people are seeing that, yes, she is trapped, and no, she doesn't have any children, and no, her husband doesn't seem to care, and they'll never have anything like that. There is no warmth. So, I found it really important to choose just the right gift that would kind of like be appropriate in the Victorian era and something they would really use, but also something that would hurt. So it did take time to construct that, but that's kind of like the way I did it. I went at it like what's something that could be done in the Victorian era, would make sense, but also would be a backhand slap. So, if anybody else is a writer listening to this and looking to do that, that's kind of what my process was.
And it took place over this like fascinating set of pages. There's 5 or 6 pages of the beginning of the book where like you learn about sort of the exact thing that you were talking about how the mother wants to feels the need to lash out, but that lashing out always leaves her empty inside. But then she overthinks that lashing out too, completely. And it all of these things go towards, even though you're not really dealing with Abigail for a large part of the book. She's not like the focus of the book for, I don't know, the first 50 or 60 pages of it. You get sort of all of the pieces of like what the mother also is like the one who screws Abigail up, but she also is not the bad guy either. And it's very clear when you're writing this that like she has her own set of faults, and she has her own set of things, and she has her own set of stuff that lashes out that go even before this birdcage incident. It goes out to that first page of the book, I think, that you lay out that like Abigail is the first name. And like you wanted her to feel like pure and chaste, but then like how she came up with the middle name just as a way to like really stick it to her husband, and just the way like the it's not the manipulation, it's just the calculation that she has that all go into how Abigail turns out.
That's right. Yeah. And it was also important to me to show that this is not just Abigail. This isn't just a story of, child abuse or anything like that, that all of these things stem from somewhere. You don't just, typically, with an abusive parent, it's not just going to be, I had this child and I hate it, for no reason. There's always something there. So I wanted to dig into what some of those reasons could be, and that it actually really doesn't have to do with Abigail. It just ends up on Abigail. And, these are real life things that happen. And I know that so many people look in from the outside. I like to cover in my book psychological issues that people sort of look in from the outside and don't really get it. It's sort of like, well, why would that happen? Well, why would somebody do that? And why don't you just leave, kind of thing. Why would a mother abuse her daughter? And then why doesn't the daughter just leave then? And I wanted to build that from the very beginning by showing, not just telling like a whole big background or something, but by showing all the things that happen to Elizabeth. We get even like a glimpse of her own mother who, really did not speak well to her and really wasn't very nice to her. We get this kind of generational abuse that is much, much worse with Abigail, of course, because Elizabeth has married a man who is actually pretty different from her. This kind of stuff happened all the time in the Victorian era. It was not necessarily about love. It was about marrying and duty and home. And it was not necessarily, do I love this person? Do I want to spend the rest of my life with them? What are their values? Things like that. It was kind of expected that you should all have this level of values, period. Not so much do you, but you're supposed to. So if we're all, in the Victorian era and we're going to church and we're, all church families, let's say, because that was a very big thing back then, it's expected that we are all pretty much the same, and we all have the same kinds of morals. And regardless of whether you love each other or not, you take care of each other and you form just this family unit where if you're very lucky, two people might fall in love. And, in some cases, they would be really great friends. And in other cases, many cases, they really didn't like each other. And that's not to say, people never married because they loved each other or anything. It was just a convention because, we really were supposed to get married, period, whether you're ready to or whether you've found someone or not. And just think about what that would feel like. Having to marry someone who maybe you really don't match with and you're trying really hard, but they're kind of like they have these expectations of you that you just don't seem to be able to match. Like they're very stiff and, on the colder side and very like, don't touch me in public, and there shouldn't really be affection and, things like that. And you're kind of the opposite. And you're a very warm person and you're loving and you want a deeper relationship. And that person simply won't give it to you and doesn't just not give it to you, but makes you feel like something is wrong with you, that you would want that you would act like that, like shame on you. Think about the damage that would do and how painful it would be, especially if you can't leave, which is, many times how it was in the Victorian era. It's not that divorce was unheard of, but it was uncommon and much more difficult on, the woman's side. So like, just imagine this buildup of all that pain, not only from Elizabeth's parents, which we see a glimpse of, but from her husband really pushing her away, but still expecting her to do all of her duty. There's just so much there to work from that, as someone who obviously wants to lash out, she's unable to just deal with this kind of stuff by either talking it out with her friends because this is the Victorian era and we don't do that, or, even within herself saying, all right, like clearly this man and I do not get along and we're kind of stuck together, but I'm not going to take it out on the child. I'm going to love the child. No, instead it's kind of the opposite. I'm in pain and you're going to be in pain too. And I'm going to hurt my husband through you, the child, this innocent child that really has nothing to do with anything. This happens all the time, even now. So, I write these things from the perspective of really wanting people who have no idea what that's like or have no idea why it exists to kind of grasp it all the way from like where it starts and really feel like you're in it, really get it.
Was the reason that's fabulous. I keep thinking about how Abigail was treated compared to Emma and Christopher, and it's just such a biting line. Like I think about thinking about it all morning, where the father writes these pieces in his journal, and at some point he says, I'm going to butcher this, but it's something along the lines of like, she finally gave me a son and has atoned for all of the horrible things that she is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And do you think that like was the like why did why did the mother take it all out on Abigail? Was it because that she like the minute that Abigail was born, like it really became apparent that she would be bound to this man forever? Or like what was it about Abigail and not the other kids that like really brought her ire?
This is something that I have studied in psychology because I find it so interesting. It's bizarre how sometimes one child is abused and no other children. Of course, there are situations where all the children are abused, but lots of times it's just one child. And there are books dedicated to that kind of psychology. I believe it was A Child Called It. I don't know if you've happened to read that. But there's a book called The Child Called It. And I can't remember just how many siblings this author had, but he wrote about the severe abuse that he experienced. And he was the youngest child, and he was the only one being abused out of like 4 children or something like that. And it was just crazy, and that, I would say that book is what started me my fascination with the idea that why one child? Why just this one kid that you're picking on? So in the case of Abigail and Elizabeth, we have a mother who is already on edge. She's already having a lot of problems. Obviously, she doesn't have a good relationship with her parents. Her relationship with her husband is no better, and maybe worse in the way that this is someone who's supposed to or intended to cherish you. And it's the opposite with him. He's sort of more like, I want a son, so give it to me. There's no like fantasizing and dreaming and, about this child. It's really more like, if you were a pious woman, you would give me a son, which did happen back then. Sometimes, not everybody, but there was this belief, and I kind of wanted to pick that up a bit and shine a light on it, that if you were religious enough, you would pray a lot and you would kind of get what you wanted. And he has that belief about her that she's not pious enough, and that's the cause of their grief. And he takes that out on her a lot. That's a big part of it. He really wants a son. She has a kid. It's a daughter. Now she's stuck having kids until he gets what he wants. And this was not something that anybody could stop from happening back then. If a husband wanted to have this many children, it was kind of your duty as the wife to give him that many children, or to have kids until he got the son or daughter that he wanted. This was not unheard of. And I kind of wanted to shine a light on that. Again, like I'm picking on specific things that happened. This was not every family by any means. But I did want to sort of like pick on all these things that come together and are really painful for a family. And when they come together, of course, in the worst way possible. I mean, this isn't even a woman who really wants to have children. If you really sort of read the book in that way, like how happy is she even with a kid at all? Not very. They have a nanny. She doesn't do a whole lot. She doesn't go to church. She's not like, she doesn't volunteer. She doesn't really visit with anybody, Elizabeth. So her time really could be spent with her kids. But instead, she doesn't really do a whole lot of that. So if we read into it, this is a woman in the modern age who may never have gotten married, or may have gotten married later once she found somebody she loved. And this is also a woman who may never have had kids. We don't know. Maybe if she met the right guy. But that's definitely a part of it. She knows now, because this is a daughter, because she's stuck with a daughter, she's going to have to keep having kids until Richard gets what he wants, and there's really nothing she can do about it. That is part of why Abigail in particular is the one who's picked on to start, and then she's just such an easy target. She's a kid. She can't defend herself. There's nothing she can do. So, to antagonize this cold husband that is clearly hurting Elizabeth so deeply, she can hurt him in, a sort of a roundabout way by hurting his daughter, who he then does not take the right steps to protect. So, that's part of it. Once it starts, it's very hard to stop unless you're somebody who's willing to recognize your abusive patterns. It's not going to happen. This kid is an easy target for her pain. And she gets away with murder, really, with it. She gets away with everything. So why should she stop? She only escalates, really. And then she really gloms on to the idea that since I can't really do a whole lot to hurt my husband, I can take out all my anger I can take out all my pain, all my disappointment, and everything else on this kid.
Yeah, it's a tragic it's such a tragic story. I think that I honestly think that the blurb doesn't do it justice because like it's so much more complicated than like just that you can get in those 250 words. Like those are my favorite books. My favorite books are the ones that like when you read the blurb, you're like, oh, I think I'm going to get this story, and then you read it, and you're like, oh, yeah, that thing didn't even come close to like telling what I was going to get inside of there. I I really hate blurbs because they never do the book justice. They either take take a book that is going to be bland and boring, and then you're like, oh, that seems really interesting because you hit all of these parts, but like then it falls flat, or it takes a book that like. I actually think this is to go back to Jennifer. Like Jennifer's book is also. I told my friend who read it, is like, do not read the blurb. Just go buy it because like it does not do the book justice. The book is about like if you just read the blurb, it's about a guy who goes to a motel and like has a week where he like kind of meets weird people, and you're like, doesn't sound like that interesting a book. But you're like, no, you have to read the thing. And I felt very much the same about this. That while the blurb is fascinating, like it does not do the book justice.
I'm glad it's that direction and not the opposite direction.
Well, it's usually the opposite direction, so I'm always happy when it is in this direction.
I find the blurb writing difficult to a degree. I find it easier to write for clients, for people whose books I'm editing, because I can pull out the things that are fascinating and the things that will draw people in and things like that. But for my own books, I definitely struggle. It can be very hard. You should have read the original blurb. It was even more. It shared even less. And, part of it is I'm always afraid of sharing too much. I think of too many things as spoilers, and they're not necessarily. But, I'm always afraid of ruining the reader experience by giving away too much. And I never want to oversell it, where I think something is really important or really good, and it turns out actually, people would have preferred to hear about this, because that's way more important or something. I definitely struggle with that with my own books. It's a tricky process. That can take me days, blurb.
Well, it's not only that, but like, there's certain books that are just easier to blurb. Like I have a book called Sorry for Existing, which is about a boy who meets a homeless alien and helps rebuild her ship to get off the planet. But like, it's not about that at all. It's about a child who's abused, who like... who like goes to who leaves his abusive father and finds an abusive grandfather, and like and the grandfather is only nice to the child, and it's about like how you could have these relationships with people and they look so different to you as opposed to everybody else, and it's about like trauma and like and all of these things. Like it is very little to do with the plot of the book, because like it doesn't matter. It's just a conveyance vehicle to tell this whole other more important story. And usually the 1-star reviews that I get for it are like, this isn't about an alien at all. It's like this aliens kind of peppered in one place after another, and it's a whole different book. And I'm like, yeah, it's a whole different book, but like you can't just write that blurb that like blather on for 1,000 words. Like you've got to be like, it's about this thing, and like look at how exciting it is, and now you should buy this book. But I feel like any like when you think about a book like Fault in Our Stars, or like any John Green book or Hank Green book, or like a lot of just like regular like genre contemporary fiction, you're like that book sounds a bit boring. But then you read it and I think that there's a certain I think there's a certain kind of book that blurbs really well in like action adventure. Like if I'm going to read like a Robert Ludlum book, it's like, okay, like this says it's going to be about a thing, and like that's the thing it's going to be about. But then like with most genres, especially the genres that like the psychological suspense, especially like this historical fiction, it feels like it's just like way harder to blurb something like that, because like the book is about a family, and it takes place like 90%, 95% in one house, or 100% in like 2 houses and a garden. And you're like, that it just sounds like I'm going to be reading a boring thing. But you're like, no, it's completely engrossing. It's just like doesn't feel like it's going to be engrossing if I only have 100 words to tell you what it is.
That's right. And you're absolutely right. It is really, really hard when it's, that kind of thing. And so much of it is in the psychology. And it's not, like you said, action adventure type of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Much easier to blurb. But like, how do I get across all the complexities in a family that you're going to be reading about, and like all the undertones, and why the time period was picked and how important it is, and why the claustrophobia is important. Like, you can't really blurb. You're right. You can't really blurb. That's very, very difficult. And you kind of do the best you can, knowing that this doesn't really cover it, but this is kind of all I can do,
Right.
and try to get people interested, but not give too much away, and not drone on about like the psychological aspects that then might sound too heady. It's very accessible stuff. This is not, something that's difficult to understand, really. It's written in a suspenseful and interesting way purposely so that you can read it, and you can sort of, if you want to read it and look at the motifs and the symbolism and the themes and stuff like that, you can. But if you really just want to read it as a suspense book or a psychology book, you can do that too. I'm just reading this for entertainment. You can definitely do that as well. But yeah, it is. Boy, is it hard to blurb. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's really because like you're like, yeah, there's a 4-page story about how like the dad won't let the mom write the ledger, but it's like a fascinating 4 pages. It's like I was reading it and I was like, I hate this person because like she's so compellingly writing this very story that if I told someone about it, it would like not feel like what I feel. And I have to ask, like, how do you plot a book like this? Because again, to go back to action adventure, which is most of what I write is like big explosions, those are very easy to be like, there's an explosion here and then there's going to be there and then they're going to do this, that, and the other thing. But when something is so small and intimate, and I don't mean small in a bad way, but like the moments are not these like, are you plotting the same way as you would plot like a book that it has more action and like more set pieces and stuff, or are you doing it a whole different way? Could you talk a little bit about your process of how you develop the book?
Definitely. Yeah, it is totally different than something like that. You're absolutely right. What I really do, I am a pantser. I'm not a plotter, but even so, I might be able to plot something that was based in action or adventure or something along those lines better. With something like this, it is highly emotional, and all the pieces have to fit very, very carefully together. This is a 1,000-piece jigsaw that we're doing here. That every piece has to play into the next, and I want everything having to add on top of itself. One thing adds on top of another, and then we reach this like massive climax where it all plays into it. There aren't any wasted pages or pieces. Those mundane details all play a part. They all matter. So really what I do, my whole process is the characters. It's all about the characters. It's really not about what is this plot point or how do I get there or anything like that. It's really about getting into the characters and feeling them, like really feeling them, even if they're terrible people, really trying to feel what they feel, their frustrations, what they really want. And it's not always, it can be, sure, writing down notes about like, what is this character's motivation? What upsets them? Where do they want to get in life? What would their ideal world be? That kind of stuff. You can, but you also have to be super flexible, because in my opinion, at least for my process, I really have to let that character take over the writing. It has to come from them. And like, no matter how much I try, to get a story to go in a direction, when it's character based like this, it's all about the character development. It's not necessarily going to end the way I want it to. And the decisions the characters make are not going to be easily plotted. They're going to build on what's happened before. And so, like, I actually tend to write out of order, which a lot of people are surprised about. I write out of order. I write whatever scene is really in my head and really inspiring me. And then when I'm done, I have to go back and make sure all the pieces fit and I haven't left anything out. And, like sometimes I'll find a character, like Abigail's brother will just be missing from like a big portion of the story. And I'll have to go and make sure he's in there, even when he's not important, like he's just got to be mentioned. So it doesn't look like he's just dropped off the face of the planet. But, all in all, I'm really writing these things emotionally. It is heavily emotional. I want it to come across that way, definitely. And I have to take the time to be in, a character like the father's shoes, like Richard's shoes, who is not a character I like. And I think he's an idiot. He's really not a good person whatsoever. He makes no effort to really understand his wife. But I have to dig into that, and I have to be in his shoes and really grasp what would somebody like this feel, and what does frustration actually feel like to him, and what does he see, when his daughter is being abused, and he can see the marks. When he sees the marks, even if he's out of the house when these actions are taken against her, how does he feel? And like, what is actually important to him? Is it confronting Elizabeth? Does he even feel like he can confront Elizabeth? Does he have any fear of her? Like, there are a lot of questions that I am asking him in a way, along the way. And, I do end up sometimes, if I find things are not coming together right, even though I'm deeply inside these characters and I'm writing the entire story based on their development and their pain and the things that are happening to them, there are times when I'm not too sure, like, what decision they would make. Sometimes it's a matter of, just sitting on it for a while and really mulling it over and trying different things. And sometimes I realize that I don't know what they would do. And if that's the case, then that means I actually don't know the character as well as I thought I did. That's when I start taking out, you can bring up a Word document or whatever works for you. But for me, I have like these little notepads. I'm trying to remember the name of one of them, but it's a knock notepad. And the idea is exploring whatever is, I think it's called self-therapy, but I don't use it for myself. I use it for my characters. And it's got all these like little questions and little things you can check off about what a person would be feeling, what they're going through and things like that. And I actually use that and write about my character. And I can see where I get snagged. Like I start filling out this form that's pre-made, and when I stop and I don't know the answer, I'm missing something. So like in Brotherhood of Secrets, I realized I didn't know the character Matthew well enough. And I only knew that because I was so stalled on a scene with him, just not knowing what he would do, that I had to take out this pad and start writing. And I hit a part where I said, oh, it's what makes him the way he is that's missing. I never explained that actually because I don't really know it. And now I need to go back and add a scene and edit scenes and change a bunch of stuff because clearly, while I thought I had a good feel for this character, I didn't realize that I had missed some of his backstory and why he has become the way he is. So like I need to work through that in writing so I can see literally where do I stop? Like where am I getting caught when I'm writing about this character and who he is? So like when I'm, going back to developing the story, like I said, it really is the characters leading the story. And so like in Brotherhood of Secrets, my favorite character and the favorite character most people have is Jude. And I just love him. And I wrote most of his scenes first. His were some of the first scenes I wrote. I'll write them one after the other, even if something else would have to be in between. Because once you get into it as sort of like a character writer, I guess you could say, it's really hard to get out of that person if you really like them, you really appreciate them, they're your favorite. So, once I dig in, like that is my process. Those characters are the process. So there's really not so much plotting as writing them as people.
Do you think that comes from your short story background, like that you were able to move around the world and and tell these little stories and these little pieces in the way that you do? Do you think that maybe that your novel evolution sort of came because it came from short stories that allows you to do that in a way that you're saying all these things and it's like blowing my mind. I'm sitting here like shaking. I'm like I could not imagine doing the way that you're doing, but based upon your background, I could see how it could make complete sense.
Now that you bring that up, a lot of people overwrite. They write like too much in the first draft and they have to cut it back. But I'm exactly the opposite. I underwrite. I do too little and I keep it very sparse. And that's the way I write short stories as well. But it works better in a short story, of course. There doesn't need to be quite as much fleshing out. I am what I would call more of a sparse writer, where I give you only the details you need. And I really don't like to go on about the details of a room that really don't matter. I want you can picture it however you want, as long as you know that Abigail is sitting in a chair that reflects her. It's stiff and it's tall and it's overwhelming, just like she becomes. That's really what matters to me. So like you're saying, with my short story background, I did write poetry and short stories, microfiction I really liked. And I would write these very small, tight microcosms sort of a world instead of an entire world or of an experience. And a lot of times with the short stories, I liked it to be more metaphorical. Like I can write lots of different kinds of short stories, but I think some of where my novel writing comes from is some metaphorical stuff that I would write that is not really directly talking about something. It's just heavily metaphorical, and it's bringing you into almost like maybe it would come across as fantastical, but the whole thing is one big metaphor. So that was actually one of my first pieces coming out of college that I got published was called Oxygen Defined, and it was in Guinness-Sacco Journal. And that was 100% metaphor. And I have a whole bunch of different short stories like that. And I got very into short story writing and microfiction, where I would write a story in, let's see, like 90 words or 50 words. Like I would really challenge myself. And so then when I decided to start novel writing again, I had written a novel in middle school and then in high school. Of course, neither of them were really mature enough to make it anywhere. But then, after college, and I had gotten published with poetry and short stories, I really wanted to get back into novel writing and see. My question was, could I still do it? Because once I had gotten into these very small, sort of more sparse stories, I sort of felt like, can I still write a whole novel? And the answer was, I can, but in my way. I'm definitely not somebody who's going to turn out a 100,000 word novel. I'm going to be someone who's more toward between 50 and 60,000 words. That's really my sweet spot. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's all these guides out there that tell you how long a novel should be and how long it should be in your genre. But if your novel is really, really good, it doesn't matter so much about the word count. That's my belief anyway. Of course, like if somebody were to ask me how long should this be, I could give them a guide. But I really think that you should have the most powerful story that you can. And that is usually by having the details that really matter. So yeah, I do feel that the short stories that I wrote played a big part in multiple ways. It definitely set me up for having a lot of metaphors and themes running in my novels. And it also set me up for telling stories in fast-paced, quick ways that have only the details you really need and sort of just get to the point, fast, so that every scene matters. That's the kind of fiction I like to read too.
Well, on top of that, it like each scene really like feels like its own little story too, and I'm sure that helps having the microfiction. Like you're not just planting something and you're telling, and then like it becomes relevant in 100 pages. Like you understand each thing like in the moment as well as when it comes back, and that's a skill that most writers don't have.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. I do like to make sure that, like, every single detail counts and that it is understandable why we're seeing it right then. But, it all plays a bigger part. And, there are so many things where, I would sort of have an idea. This goes back to writing, like character writing, as opposed to plot writing. Where I would sort of have an idea of a scene that I was really excited about. And I would be like, oh, I can't wait to get to that scene. That's going to be really, really intense. It's going to be really good. I try to make all my scenes, at least to some degree, intense, even if it's just intense for one character. I want them all to really matter to the reader. So you're like, oh man, wow, okay, we really have been through, like, what's coming next, that kind of a thing. And sometimes I'll be really looking forward to writing a scene that I'm sure I'm going to need. I'm totally sure I'm going to need it. And then, like, I happen to write the scene before it, and it turns out I don't need the scene that I was looking forward to at all. And it is so painful because I've been so excited about, like, I will have a visual sort of. That's one of the other things I do, actually, since you asked about my process, is I really need to be able to visualize and feel everything. It's not just feeling, but it is also visualizing. So it is a movie in my head. I can see everything that happens, and if I can't see it, then it's probably not good enough to write, so I probably won't write it. But I see it all in my head, and when you put all that together, I really want it to be highly visual for the details that you need so that you can kind of picture it how you want to picture it, me furnishing only the details that you need to see because they're relevant. And then the rest is all characters. That's really what you're reading is the characters. So I may have gone off your point though. Sorry.
No. I mean, it's great. I love all of this process stuff. So I'm completely enthralled by everyone and how, I work a lot in comics, and the writer kind of is invisible a lot in comics. I mean, like we write the story and then we like do the dialogue and like we hire the artist, but like a lot of like you can tell a lot by what a writer cares about by like what artists they chose and what panels they chose to write. But it's very different in novels because you have so much finer control over the experience because you're writing every word, whereas when comics you're collaborating with somebody else and like it's your vision and you're the one hiring the person to fulfill your vision, but it's also their vision and like they're apt to take it in a way that like is magically different than what you had. But in every time you end up with a comic book, like you end up with a comic book at each time. And I feel like, every time you read a book, it's different. It's like different. It's like sometimes it's like, oh, this is not what I expected that a book could be. And like, I did not expect that I could enjoy. So my two favorite books that I've read this summer are your book and Jennifer's book, which are both psychological suspense. And one paranormal, one not paranormal, told from many different perspectives. And I looked at my wife last night. I was like, I think I like paranormal suspense. I never would have. I think I would like psychological suspense. Apparently set in the 1800s. Like I did not know that I was like the kind of person who would like that kind of work. And finding that about yourself when you're about to turn 38 is like a wonderful thing. And I appreciate that you both were able to bring that to me.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. I really, really appreciate that. It means so much, especially because like the suspense element is so important to me. And of course, it's set in the Victorian era, which I always feel sometimes people can assume that it might be drier. And I definitely want people to realize it's really about the writing. It's not about the period. So you can write something in the 1500s that's very, very exciting, and you can write things about the Victorian era that are super exciting. I feel like a lot of people for the Victorian era really relate older books, first of all, of course, written in that time period, classic books, and really relate romance. Like whenever I look up Victorian, it's heavily romance. And there's just so much in the Victorian era that lends itself to suspense. And some of it is, the social, the society back then, the way etiquette was so important and really talking about your feelings or any kind of mental illness, any of that is all, don't talk about it. It doesn't exist. Ignore it. Etiquette is super important. High morals are super, super important. And another really cool aspect that I get more into in Brotherhood of Secrets is really the lack of technology, of course, which leads to it being very difficult to solve crimes. And that there were lots of really interesting ways that you could commit a crime and get away with it back then, where even with really good detectives, it's going to be so much harder to track things. Like I was writing that book and I had put something in about fingerprints. And I was sure that, these characters had to be careful of their fingerprints, which they still need to be careful of to some degree. But as I was researching, and I do research and write at the same time, a certain amount I can do ahead of time, a certain amount I have to do during, I discovered that in my time period, they really thought there were only like 7 kinds of fingerprints. They thought that, there were those 7 distinct kinds. So of course you still want to hide your fingerprints, but it's not so much a problem because they didn't realize every fingerprint is different. So it changed the way the crimes were committed. It changed the way they covered up those crimes. That stuff can be so exciting and interesting to write. And I'm going to get more into that in book 3, where we actually have a man from, well, he starts out as a teenager in Brotherhood of Secrets, and he starts out as a teenager in the 3rd book, and we're going to have him develop into a Pinkerton detective, which is going to be super, super interesting. So I'm delving into different kinds of stuff there. There will definitely be psychology. We'll have a lot to do with trauma, so that might interest you, and based on your interest in psychological fiction. But it's also going to have some very interesting ways to get away with not just murder, but just in general being a terrible person in the time period and leaving really like pretty much no trail unless you can get the newspapers of that time in that area that person happened to be in and find out what they've been up to, or question people, probably in person. It's a lot harder to track down these people who might be doing damage, whether it's, physical damage, whether it's murder, or whether it's psychological, manipulation and cult type thinking. It's going to be way harder to track somebody like that back then. And I find that stuff fascinating. So I get so into it when I write, and I really love it. And I definitely want people to know that older time periods do not mean boring, and it does not have to just be romance by any means.
For sure. Well, like, I could totally see that because, like a lot of writing modern is like, how can I get all of these modern conveniences away from these people so that I can build suspense? Because, you have a cell phone. So like that takes a lot of stuff away. You have the internet, so you can research a lot of people. You have like tons of social media platforms. So like, how do I like a big part of writing in this era, especially writing suspense in this era, is like, how do I get all of the things that we know about humanity away from these people so that they could actually build suspense? So like moving it, and people have always been people, like you said, we're used to reading like the classics, but like horrible people did not just start existing in like the last 10 years. They've existed for hundreds of years. And I can totally see how that era would lend itself to like a lot more suspense, or maybe not a lot more suspense, but like at least as much suspense and thriller type aspects as you have now, without having the hampering of having to figure out how to take technology away from people, or consistently using technology as a deus ex machina.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, think about the level of detective that had to exist back then to even track somebody. I mean, it's going to take a lot, and I'm reading all about Alan Pinkerton and, doing a lot of research on the kinds of methods they use. And it's just really interesting. But, it's great that you mentioned that also, because one of my favorite things, like, we watch a lot of period dramas. So there will be period dramas, especially around the Victorian era, and things are depicted as so beautiful and just like amazing. And that's because we're looking at mostly wealthy families. And, of course, more recently, there have been some more TV shows and movies that focus on downstairs life or not so wealthy life, regular workers. But still, it doesn't always get into the fact that there were massive problems back then, just as there are now, like with people being abusive and things like that. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about Downton Abbey was, I know people remember that for mostly it being gorgeous and, the great historical detail and some of the wonderful relationships in it and the great storytelling. But there was my favorite season is actually season 1, which is pretty rare for a TV show. But season 1 had Thomas, the character Thomas, at his worst. He is so evil. He is just so nasty. And he is just probably one of my all-time favorite villains out there. And the reason is because he is so absolutely unflappable. Nobody seems to be able to stop him. Nobody even has an impact on him. He just doesn't care. Like, you can slam, there's one episode where one character threatens him to stop, the things that he's doing, and slams him into a wall, and it just has no effect on him. And I really love that they showed that back then. It's not just, the main family who is so nice and really very generous, very kind people. And most of the servants are the same. They're very, very nice, and they all have their own problems, but really these are a lot of people that mostly get along. That happens a lot, in these kinds of TV shows. But I loved that character, and he was one of the inspirations for Mr. Locke in Brotherhood of Secrets, who is also similarly unflappable, and you just can't get him to slip up, and you can't get a reaction, and I think that that's so powerful. And another thing that I liked in Downton Abbey in a later season was we finally see that there's this nanny who, and this isn't like a big spoiler or anything, but if you haven't watched it, but there's this nanny. I can't remember if she's like Scottish or what she is. I don't remember if there was anything special about her, but one of the Granthams, one of the main characters, finds the nanny abusing one of the children, and it's more psychological type abuse, saying nasty things to one child and saying really, really great things to another, really nice, and telling the other child how they don't even deserve to be there, kind of stuff. I haven't seen it in a while, but it was like that kind of a thing. And of course, this child is going to be growing up thinking that, with that implanted in their heads. And I was like, I really love that they finally pulled out what kind of damage could be done, leaving, these children in the hands of someone they don't really know. They're just kind of trusting them because they had good recommendations or whatever it may be. But it was a really great dark turn. As you can tell, I love dark stuff. And it was a really great dark turn that we just don't often see in that time period, especially because you can't really do a background check, can you? I mean, you can only really try to get references, and that's it, and hope they're telling the truth. So, those kinds of moments are some of the most powerful in period dramas, in my opinion. And I like to sort of look at the psychology of people in general and mix it with everything that was going on back then, and all the limitations and, the societal, issues and things like that, and mix it all together to create the things that probably really happened that nobody talks about. And I think that's part of what gets me so excited about writing in that time period.
I love it. Well, we haven't even gotten to any of the other cool stuff that you do, editing your own podcast. So I'd like to, as we've reached the end of our hour together, I'd love for you to tell us where we can find more information about you, and give us one tip for writers out there that you want us to leave this podcast with.
Oh, thank you. This has been such a great time. I really enjoyed talking to you. I would say, first of all, you can find me at ChristieStratus.com. That's my author website. And I am also on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest under my name. You can also find my editing business, which is called Proof Positive. You can find that on proofpositivepro.com. And I edit fiction, nonfiction. I work on edit newsletters, websites. I've even edited emails, kind of just anything that requires writing, I can edit. So you can head over to proofpositivepro.com. And as you mentioned, I also have a podcast called Writers Showcase Podcast, and you can find the most up-to-date episodes and watch live episodes on Facebook. You can just look up Writers Showcase Podcast and you'll find us. There's also an Authors on the Air. That's the radio station we belong to. There's an Authors on the Air YouTube and SoundCloud, but the most up to date and the only way to watch live is on Facebook. So definitely like that page and follow it for the latest. We're actually taking a bit of a break, and we'll be back in January 2021. So that gives you plenty of time to go back through some of our interviews and enjoy them. And if I was to give one tip to writers, I would say the most important thing is to really write what makes you passionate, what excites you. And while it's great to read books on writing and learn about writing and take courses and things like that, that's fantastic. But when you write what your passion is, all that you've learned really comes together to make a fantastic book. And that's where your writing becomes something super special. So, like I said, you can do all the research you want, and that's fantastic. You'll probably be able to use it. But make sure you get your passion in there, because that's what's really going to shine through and make it a book that everyone wants to read. That's my tip.
I love it. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
That was my interview with Christie Stratus. If you enjoyed that one, please go pick up Anatomy of a Darkened Heart. I could not even go into a third of what this book was about because of spoilers. It was phenomenal, though, and make sure to follow Christie online and tell her how much you enjoyed it. If you want to make your own awesome novel, then make sure to go over to thecompletecreative.com for my free writing course about how to make an amazing novel. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and please have a great day.